March 19, 1972. Studio 1, NBC Burbank. The red light above camera 3 pulsed steady, and in 17 million American living rooms, the 10:30 ritual began without ceremony. Johnny Carson adjusted the blue envelope on his desk, a gesture so habitual that audiences no longer consciously registered it, and delivered the monologue with the metronomic precision that had, over a decade, become the heartbeat of late-night television. The envelope remained there through every show, positioned at a 45-degree angle, its presence as deliberate as everything else in Carson's kingdom. It contained the opening jokes, typed on index cards by a team of writers who understood that spontaneity on The Tonight Show was an architectural feat, not an accident. The envelope symbolized something audiences intuited but rarely articulated, that the man who appeared effortless had prepared for everything. Except this. By 1972, Johnny Carson had transformed The Tonight Show from a television program into a national institution. Appearing on his stage did not merely boost a career, it manufactured one. A comedian who made Carson laugh could sell out theaters the following week. An actress who charmed him during the couch segment saw her asking price double. The show's power resided not in spectacle, but in Carson's singular ability to bestow something more valuable than publicity: legitimacy. In an era when 3 networks divided the entire country's attention, Carson's desk functioned as the final gate through which American fame had to pass. Politicians understood this. Nixon courted him. Reagan studied him. The culture moved at Carson's tempo, and Carson moved at a tempo he controlled absolutely. What made his authority unusual was its gentleness. Carson did not dominate through aggression or provocation. He dominated through restraint. The raised eyebrow that could dissolve a guest's pretension, the silence that made a nervous actor realize they were failing, the laugh, genuine, musical, democratizing, that signaled approval and sent careers into orbit. Television executives marveled at his precision. Carson prepared for interviews with the thoroughness of a prosecutor, reading books by authors, watching films frame by frame, studying mannerisms. He entered every segment knowing more than the guest expected and revealing only what the moment required. The performance was designed to look like a conversation. In truth, it was a controlled detonation of charisma and timing, executed live 5 nights a week without visible effort. The audience believed they knew him. This was the central illusion, and Carson guarded it jealously. He gave interviews rarely. He avoided personal revelation. The man who appeared in 17 million homes each night remained, by design, unknowable. America saw the smile, the perfect timing, the monologue delivered with a cigarette's casualness. They did not see the hours of preparation, the creative control enforced through quiet ultimatums, the cold professionalism that kept producers terrified and loyal. Carson's private life remained private not through secrecy, but through the sheer force of his on-screen persona, which was so complete that it left no room for questions. His father had never appeared on the show. Homer Lloyd Carson was not a public figure. He had worked in Iowa managing power lines, an existence of utility poles and rural silence, far removed from the studio lights and Burbank glamour his son now commanded. The Carson family did not traffic in sentiment. Johnny spoke of his childhood without warmth, describing his mother as emotionally withholding and his father as distant, a man more comfortable with electrical diagrams than affection. This was not trauma in the operatic sense. It was the ordinary deprivation of mid-century masculinity processed into comedy and control. Johnny Carson had built an empire on likability, and he had done it by becoming the opposite of his parents: warm when needed, present on demand, emotionally available in 7-minute increments. The relationship between father and son existed in negative space. Kit Carson watched his son's ascent without comment. He did not visit the studio. He did not seek attention. When Johnny spoke of him in interviews, rarely, it was with the careful neutrality of a man describing a stranger who happened to share his name. There were no public feuds, no dramatic estrangements. There was simply distance, the kind that calcifies over decades until it becomes structural. No one had informed Johnny Carson that his father was in the building. The show followed its usual architecture that night: monologue, desk piece, first guest, a comedian whose name survives only in NBC archives. The audience responded on cue, their laughter timed to Carson's rhythm like a congregation trained in silent liturgy. Ed McMahon laughed 3 beats behind the punchlines, providing social permission. Doc Severson's band punctuated transitions with brassy competence. The machinery of late-night television operated without friction, every element synchronized to Carson's invisible governance. Then, Fred DeCordova appeared at the edge of Carson's peripheral vision during a commercial break. DeCordova never approached the desk during taping unless something had malfunctioned, a guest too drunk to walk, a prop failure, a national emergency requiring acknowledgement. Carson turned, and DeCordova spoke quietly, his words inaudible to the studio audience but visible in Carson's face, which underwent the smallest calibration, not shock, but recalibration. The commercial ended, the applause sign blinked. Camera 1 returned to Carson, whose expression had reset to professional warmth.
"Ladies and gentlemen," Carson said, his tone calibrated between surprise and welcome, "we have a guest tonight I wasn't expecting." The curtain parted, and Kit Carson walked onto the stage. He moved with the deliberate care of a man unaccustomed to performance, his suit too formal for the environment, his posture rigid. The audience applauded politely, uncertain what they were witnessing. Johnny Carson rose from behind the desk, an unusual gesture reserved for major stars or dignitaries, and extended his hand. The handshake lasted 2 seconds. The embrace did not occur. They sat, father and son, separated by the desk and the envelope, and 17 million invisible witnesses. What followed was not dramatic in the conventional sense. There was no confrontation, no revelation, no scripted catharsis. Kit Carson spoke in the flat vowels of rural Iowa, answering Johnny's questions with the brevity of a man who considered words a form of inefficiency. He described his work. He mentioned the weather back home. He expressed mild bewilderment at his son's fame, as though commenting on a weather pattern he had not predicted. Johnny Carson, whose career rested on his ability to make guests comfortable, interviewed his father with the careful professionalism of a surgeon working on unstable tissue. He did not probe. He did not joke. He maintained the rhythm of the show, asking questions designed to elicit safe responses, guiding the segment toward conclusion. The audience did not laugh. They watched with the confused attention of people witnessing something intimate that had been accidentally broadcast. The segment lasted 7 minutes, standard length for a Tonight Show interview, but it moved with the uncomfortable slowness of a ceremony no one had rehearsed. Kit Carson offered no anecdotes about his son's childhood. Johnny Carson did not ask for them. The envelope remained on the desk between them, unopened, its presence suddenly symbolic of everything unspoken. When the segment ended, Johnny Carson stood, shook his father's hand again, and thanked him for coming. Kit Carson exited through the curtain, and the show continued. Carson introduced the next guest, a singer whose name also survives only in archives, and the machinery resumed its flawless operation. By the time the closing credits rolled, the audience had been recalibrated through Carson's sheer force of professional continuity. The show had absorbed the interruption and metabolized it into content. But something had fractured. Television critics wrote about the segment the next day, struggling to articulate what they had witnessed. It was not scandal. Nothing scandalous had occurred. It was not heartwarming. No reconciliation had been staged. It was the sudden visibility of distance broadcast live between a man who had mastered the performance of intimacy and the father who had never learned to perform at all. The segment revealed in 7 minutes what Carson's entire career had been constructed to conceal, that the warmth was professional, the ease was technique, and the man behind the desk was as unknowable as he had always been. Viewers called the network in unprecedented numbers. Some expressed confusion, others discomfort. Many simply wanted to discuss what they had seen, as though the broadcast had violated an unspoken contract. Johnny Carson had invited America into his living room every night for over a decade, offering companionship without cost. In return, America had agreed not to ask too many questions. The appearance of Kit Carson broke that contract, not through revelation, but through its opposite, the confirmation that the distance audiences sensed was real, structural, and unchangeable. Carson never spoke about the segment publicly. In the decades that followed, interviewers occasionally raised the topic, and Carson deflected with the polite immovability of a man who had spent his career controlling narratives. "It was nice to have him on," he would say, and then transition to another subject with the seamless timing that had made him indispensable. Producers from that era, interviewed years later, recalled the silence in the control room during the segment. Not panic, but the collective realization that they were broadcasting something unscripted in a show where nothing was ever truly unscripted. The envelope remained on Carson's desk for the next 20 years, through every monologue, every interview, every broadcast. It became so familiar that audiences forgot it was a choice. But those who worked on the show understood its function. It was a boundary, a prop that transformed spontaneity into performance, that made the unrehearsed look effortless. The envelope promised control in an industry built on the terror of live television, where anything could happen and nothing could be undone. Kit Carson returned to Iowa after the taping. He did not appear on television again. The relationship between father and son remained what it had always been: cordial, distant, functional. When Kit Carson died in 1985, Johnny Carson attended the funeral without public comment. The moment passed into history the way most family moments do, quietly, without resolution, mourned by those who understand that some distances cannot be closed, only acknowledged.
What made the segment extraordinary was not what it revealed, but what it confirmed. For 7 minutes, America watched the machinery of Carson's performance operate without the usual concealment. They saw the effort required to maintain warmth when warmth did not come naturally. They saw a son interview his father with the same professional care he brought to interviewing senators and starlets, maintaining the rhythm of the show even as something more fragile threatened to collapse beneath it. The segment did not humanize Johnny Carson. Humanization would have required vulnerability, and Carson never trafficked in vulnerability. Instead, it clarified the nature of his authority, not intimacy, but the performance of intimacy, executed with such mastery that audiences mistook the technique for truth. The Tonight Show continued for 2 more decades. Carson retired in 1992, vanishing from public life with the same completeness he had maintained throughout his career. The desk was dismantled, the curtain was stored, the envelope, presumably, was thrown away. What remained was the legacy of a man who had understood something essential about American television, that audiences did not want authenticity, they wanted the illusion of authenticity, delivered with such consistency that it became indistinguishable from the real. The appearance of Kit Carson on The Tonight Show shattered nothing in the literal sense. No careers ended, no scandals erupted, no confessions were broadcast. But for 17 million Americans watching that night, the moment functioned as a small, uncomfortable reminder that the man who appeared in their living rooms every evening was not, in fact, in their living room. He was behind a desk, in a studio, performing a version of companionship that was brilliant, lucrative, and unreachable. The distance between father and son, made visible for 7 minutes, mirrored the distance between Carson and his audience, a gap maintained not through cruelty, but through the necessities of performance, the architecture of celebrity, and the price of becoming the most trusted man in America without ever being truly known. The envelope sat on the desk, blue and precise, holding the evening's scripts. It promised that everything was prepared, everything was controlled, and nothing would surprise the man who had built his empire on the appearance of spontaneity. Except on one night in March 1972, something had, and America, watching from 17 million separate living rooms, had seen what happened when the machinery of comfort encountered the one thing it could not script: the unannounced arrival of a father who had never learned to perform, facing a son who had learned nothing else.